Every scientist on Earth measures temperature in units called kelvins, and that unit is named, in a roundabout way, after a small river that flows through Glasgow. That is exactly the kind of city this is. Its fingerprints are all over the modern world. And yet most people could not tell you a single thing about it. Let's fix that. I'm Edward, and with careful research and AI-built visuals, I'm going to take you through the whole story. From a saint and a stream to the shipyards that built half the world. People have lived along the River Clyde for thousands of years, fishers and farmers working the water long before anyone wrote a word about them. The first outsiders to leave a real mark were the Romans. In the year 142, they pushed north and built the Antonine Wall, a turf and timber frontier running right across central Scotland, and it passed just a few miles north of where Glasgow now stands. It was the northernmost frontier of the entire Roman Empire, and the Romans held it for barely 20 years before giving up and pulling back south. Even Rome, at the height of its power, looked at this part of Scotland and decided it simply was not worth the trouble. Then, for centuries, the area around the Clyde goes quiet again. Glasgow's real story, though, begins the way a surprising number of cities do, with a holy man and a river. The river is the Clyde. And the name Glasgow is usually traced back to old words meaning something close to green hollow, which is why, even now, Glaswegians fondly call their city the dear green place. Hold on to that phrase, because it becomes very quietly ironic once the smoke arrives. The holy man is St. Mungo, also known as Kentigern, who, in the 500s, set up a small church beside a stream called the Mollendinar Burn. A community grew around it, and Mungo became the city's patron saint. Now here is the lovely part. Mungo is tied to 4 miracles, and Glaswegian children still learn them as a little rhyme. The bird that never flew, the tree that never grew, the bell that never rang, and the fish that never swam. A robin he is said to have restored to life, a frozen branch he set alight, a holy bell, and a salmon that turned up with a queen's lost ring inside it, a story that quietly rescued a marriage. Look at the official coat of arms of the city of Glasgow today, and all 4 are still there: bird, tree, bell, and fish. A 6th century legend stamped onto a modern city's badge. On the spot where Mungo was laid to rest, Glasgow Cathedral was raised in the centuries that followed, and it carries a real distinction. It is one of the very few medieval cathedrals on the Scottish mainland to survive the upheaval of the Reformation almost completely intact. Most others were stripped bare or wrecked. Glasgow's came through. Around the cathedral, the town grew. Glasgow became a burgh, a chartered town with the right to hold markets and trade, back in the 1170s. And then, in 1451, came something that mattered enormously for the centuries ahead. The University of Glasgow was founded. It is the 4th oldest university in the entire English-speaking world. Keep that in mind, because that university is going to keep producing people who change the planet. For a long time, though, Glasgow stayed small. A cathedral, a university, a market, and fishing on the Clyde. The city's motto captures the mood of those quiet centuries: let Glasgow flourish. It is actually a trimmed-down version of a longer line: let Glasgow flourish by the preaching of the word. Over time, the city, very practically, snipped off the religious half and kept the ambition. The thing that finally made Glasgow flourish was, frankly, geography and timing. In 1707, Scotland and England joined in the Union, and that suddenly handed Scottish merchants full legal access to trade with England's colonies in the Americas. and Glasgow, sitting on the west coast of Britain, had a genuine advantage. The sailing time across the Atlantic to Virginia was simply shorter from the Clyde than from London or Bristol. Glasgow's merchants seized it completely. By the 1770s, this one Scottish city was handling more than half of all the tobacco imported into the whole of Britain. The men who ran that trade became staggeringly rich. They were known as the Tobacco Lords, and they swaggered through the streets in scarlet cloaks. Their names are still printed all over the map of Glasgow today: Buchanan Street, Glassford Street, Virginia Street, Jamaica Street. A whole district of the modern city centre is still called the Merchant City. But, and this has to be said plainly, that wealth rested on a foundation that was anything but glorious. The tobacco and the sugar that came alongside it was grown and harvested by enslaved people on plantations across the Atlantic. Glasgow's grand 18th century elegance was paid for in large part by that system. For a very long time, the city was not honest with itself about this. In recent years, it has finally begun to be looking hard at how those streets got their names and at what that history actually means. And here is where Glasgow stops being merely a rich trading town and starts genuinely bending the course of human history. It happens, again, through the university. In the 1760s, a young instrument maker named James Watt was employed at the University of Glasgow repairing scientific equipment. He was handed a model of an early steam engine that was hopelessly, wastefully inefficient. Watt chewed the problem over for months. And then, famously, in 1765, while walking across Glasgow Green on a Sunday afternoon, the solution simply arrived in his head. A separate condenser, a way to stop the engine throwing away almost all of its heat. There is a stone on Glasgow Green marking roughly the spot. That single idea made steam power dramatically more efficient. And an efficient steam engine is, as much as any one thing, the machine that drives the entire industrial revolution. A genuine turning point for our whole species, and it clicked into place on a walk through a Glasgow park. At the very same university, in the very same era, a quiet, famously absent-minded professor was working on something just as enormous. His name was Adam Smith, and the thinking he did at Glasgow grew into a book, The Wealth of Nations, that more or less founded the modern study of economics, steam power and modern economics, taking shape inside one Scottish university within a few years of one another. That is not a coincidence. That is what happens when a city is suddenly full of money, problems, and clever people all at the same time. Then, in 1776, the American colonies declared independence, and Glasgow's tobacco trade collapsed almost overnight. But the city had built up capital, skills, and appetite, and it simply redirected all of it. The money poured into cotton mills, into chemical works, into iron. The River Clyde itself was deepened and reshaped by engineers so that large ships could sail right up into the city. Glasgow, in effect, re-engineered its own river. Those cotton mills have one human story worth pausing on. In a mill at Blantyre, just outside Glasgow, a 10-year-old boy started work in 1823, doing 14-hour shifts at a spinning machine, propping a book on the frame so he could teach himself while he worked. His name was David Livingstone, and that mill boy grew up to become one of the most famous explorers in the world, crossing vast stretches of Africa and turning, late in his life, into a fierce campaigner against the very slave trade that had helped build his own city. From a Glasgow cotton mill to the front pages of the entire Victorian world. And the river redirection led straight to the thing Glasgow became most famous for of all, shipbuilding. Through the 19th century, the shipyards of the Clyde, Govan, Partick, Clydebank, became the single greatest concentration of shipbuilding on the planet. The phrase Clyde-Built turned into a worldwide guarantee of quality, and the scale is genuinely hard to absorb. By around 1900, roughly 1 in every 5 ships in the entire world had been built on this single Scottish river. The Lusitania, the Queen Mary, the Queen Elizabeth, the QE2, all of them Clyde-Built. At its peak, the shipyards employed tens of thousands of men, and a launch day, when a finished hull slid down the slipway into the water, could draw enormous crowds, a whole community turning out to watch something they had built with their own hands meet the river. Glasgow grew so wealthy and so powerful that it proudly called itself the second city of the British Empire. That same Victorian university kept turning out people who reshaped the world. Working in Glasgow, the surgeon Joseph Lister pioneered antiseptic surgery, the simple but revolutionary practice of using chemicals to prevent infection during operations. Before Lister, surgery very often went badly wrong in the days afterward. After Lister, modern surgery became something a patient could genuinely expect to survive. If you have ever come safely through an operation, you have, in a real sense, benefited from work done in Glasgow. And the man behind that temperature scale from the very start of this video, William Thomson, who took the title Lord Kelvin from the River Kelvin running through Glasgow, was a professor at the University of Glasgow for more than 50 years. He helped lay the first working transatlantic telegraph cable, the Victorian Internet, the first time in history a message could cross an entire ocean in minutes instead of weeks. And the Kelvin, the unit of temperature used in every laboratory on Earth, carries the name of a Glasgow river to this day. Quick one for you while we are here. Before this video, did you know the temperature unit scientists use everywhere is tied to a river in Glasgow? Tell me in the comments. I am always curious which of these facts genuinely lands as a surprise. All of this wealth built a spectacular Victorian city. On a hill beside the cathedral, the Victorians laid out the necropolis, a vast garden cemetery of monuments and mausoleums where the tobacco merchants, shipbuilders and industrialists were laid to rest beneath statues as ambitious as anything they built in life. Stand up there today, and you can read the whole rise of the city in carved stone. And Glasgow expressed its wealth with real style. Around 1900, the architect and designer Charles Rennie Mackintosh created a look so distinctive it became known as the Glasgow style, admired right across Europe. His masterpiece, the Glasgow School of Art, is a building the whole city still grieves over after fire severely damaged it in recent years. But that wealth was wildly, painfully unequal. The very same city that launched ocean liners packed its working families into tenements, and districts like the Gorbals became infamous, some of the most overcrowded housing in all of Europe. A city can be the second city of an empire and a place of grinding poverty at exactly the same moment. Glasgow was both, simultaneously, and that tension is the engine of everything that comes next. Because Glasgow's workers did not stay quiet. In the early 20th century, the city earned itself a new name, Red Clydeside. During the First World War, with landlords pushing rents up while the men were away fighting, the women of Glasgow organised. In 1915, led by a housewife named Mary Barber, tens of thousands of tenants simply refused to pay the increases. The rent strikes were so huge and so disciplined that the government was forced to bring in rent controls across the whole of Britain. Ordinary Glasgow women with no vote and no power on paper had changed national law. Then, in 1919, it went further. An enormous demonstration filled George Square in the city centre, demanding shorter working hours. The British government genuinely afraid that Glasgow was teetering on the edge of a revolution, in the long shadow of what had just happened in Russia, sent in soldiers and tanks on the streets of a British city. One figure towered over this whole era, a Glasgow schoolteacher named John Maclean, an orator so powerful that revolutionary Russia appointed him its honorary consul in Scotland, and whom the British government jailed again and again simply for his speeches. When he was gone, in 1923, thousands of Glaswegians lined the streets for his funeral. The city understood it was marking the end of an era. The shipyards that made Glasgow also, eventually, made it a target. In March 1941, German bombers struck the shipbuilding town of Clydebank on the city's edge, across 2 devastating nights. The destruction was almost total. Of around 12,000 houses in Clydebank, only a tiny handful were left undamaged. Many residents lost their lives, and the great majority of the survivors lost their homes. And after the Second World War came the long, hard decline. Through the second half of the 20th century, the shipyards and the heavy industry that had defined Glasgow shrank and shut. The crowded old tenement districts were cleared, and vast numbers of people were moved out to enormous new housing estates on the edge of the city. Estates that too often ended up isolated, short of work and short of hope. Glasgow developed deep and stubborn problems with poverty and ill health, so persistent that researchers eventually gave the puzzle its own name, the Glasgow effect. For a while, the dear green place was genuinely struggling, but Glasgow did what Glasgow has always done. It reinvented itself. From the 1980s onward, the city deliberately rebuilt its identity around culture instead of coal and steel. In 1990, it was named European City of Culture, a turning point that genuinely changed how the world and how Glasgow itself saw the place. Today, it is recognized as a UNESCO City of Music, a city whose venues, like the legendary Barrowland Ballroom, helped launch bands from Simple Minds to Franz Ferdinand, and which now stages live music almost every night of the year. It is famous for its art, its galleries, and a sharp, warm, world-class sense of humour. This is the city, after all, that gave the world Billy Connolly. And here is a small, strange one that says a lot about the city's character. In the first half of the 20th century, Glaswegians went to the cinema more often than the people of almost any other city in the world outside North America. Glasgow was nicknamed Cinema City. Even in its hardest decades, this was a place that loved a show, a story, and a night out. A few more things you may well be carrying a piece of without realizing it. Glasgow's Underground Railway opened in 1896 and affectionately nicknamed the Clockwork Orange, is one of the oldest underground metro systems anywhere in the world. The first ever official international football match was played in Glasgow back in 1872. And then there is Irn-Bru, the bright orange Scottish soft drink made in Glasgow, which holds a claim almost no other product on the planet can match. In its home country, it has long given Coca-Cola a serious fight for the #1 spot. A local fizzy drink going toe-to-toe with the biggest brand on earth. In 2014, Glasgow hosted the Commonwealth Games, and in 2021, the city welcomed world leaders for the COP26 Climate Summit, the future of the planet being argued out in the very city that 2 centuries earlier helped build the engine that warmed it. There is a strange, heavy symmetry in that, and Glasgow is well aware of it. So look at the whole journey. A Roman frontier the empire gave up on, a saint, a stream, and a green hollow, a tobacco port grown rich on a system it now has to face honestly, the birthplace of efficient steam power and of modern economics, the greatest shipbuilding river on Earth. A city of tanks in the square and of women who rewrote the law. And today, a place that hauled itself back up out of culture and sheer character. The dear green place has been, in turn, holy, rich, mighty, broken, and reborn. So tell me in the comments, which fact got you? The Glasgow River hiding inside a scientific unit? The rent strike led by a housewife? The fizzy drink that stares down Coca-Cola? I read every reply, and they decide what I research next. And let me know which city, which nation, which corner of the map you want me to take you through after this one. I'm Edward. What is coming next on this channel is going to be sharper and deeper than anything I have made so far. So if you would like to be there for it, the subscribe button is one small tap away. Glasgow was told long ago to flourish, and against just about every reasonable expectation it did, and it still does. Thanks for watching. Don't forget to check out the video recommended by YouTube on the left side of the screen.